The rushing waters of Silver Creek had claimed 3 lives in the past year alone, and Elijah Stone knew his pregnant wife would be the 4th if he did not do something about it. He stood at the edge of the swollen waterway on that crisp morning in October of 1872, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the churning rapids, and made a decision that would change everything. His wife Mary was 6 months along with their first child, and the nearest doctor lived on the other side of this treacherous creek in the town of Redemption Springs, Colorado. Every time she needed supplies or medical attention, she had to risk crossing those deadly waters on foot, balancing precariously on slippery stones that shifted beneath her weight. Just last week, she had nearly fallen, catching herself at the last moment while Elijah's heart stopped in his chest. He could not bear the thought of losing her or their unborn child to the merciless current. Elijah was a man carved from the mountains themselves. At 6 feet 4 inches tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry a full-grown elk down from the high country, he had spent the last 8 years surviving in these unforgiving peaks. His dark brown hair fell past his shoulders in waves, often tied back with a leather cord when he worked. His arms were thick with muscle earned from chopping wood, hauling stone, and wrestling with nature itself. A full beard covered his strong jaw, and his gray eyes held both gentleness and fierce determination. He was only 28 years old, but the wilderness had shaped him into something more than just a man. He was a force unto himself. Mary Stone was 24, with hair the color of autumn wheat that she wore in a long braid down her back. Her green eyes sparkled with intelligence and warmth, and despite the hardships of mountain life, she maintained a grace that reminded Elijah of wildflowers pushing through snow. She was strong in her own right, having survived 2 brutal winters in their cabin, but pregnancy had made her more vulnerable, and Elijah felt every ounce of that vulnerability as if it were his own. He had met Mary 3 years ago when she arrived in Redemption Springs as a schoolteacher. She had come west from Boston after her parents died, seeking a fresh start in a land that promised opportunity. Elijah had been in town selling furs when he first saw her stepping off the stagecoach, looking around at the rough frontier town with a mixture of apprehension and wonder. He had not intended to speak to her. He was a mountain man, more comfortable with silence and solitude than society. But when her trunk fell from the coach and burst open, scattering her belongings across the muddy street, he found himself helping her gather her things before he even realized what he was doing. Their courtship had been slow and unexpected. Elijah started coming to town more often, finding excuses to pass by the schoolhouse. Mary, for her part, was drawn to this quiet giant who treated her with a respect and gentleness that seemed at odds with his intimidating appearance. He brought her wildflowers from the high meadows and fresh meat for her table. She brought him books and read to him by lamplight, opening worlds he had never imagined existed. When he finally asked her to marry him, kneeling in a field of columbines with his hat in his hands, she had said yes without hesitation. Now, watching the creek rage past with enough force to upend a horse, Elijah knew what he had to do. He would build a bridge, not a simple footbridge, but something solid and permanent that would keep his wife safe no matter how high the waters rose. He had never built a bridge before, but he had built their cabin, their barn, and everything else they needed to survive. He would figure this out too. The first challenge was gathering materials. Elijah spent 3 days exploring the surrounding forest, identifying the straightest, strongest pines that would serve as the bridge's main supports. He needed trees that were thick enough to span the 20-foot width of the creek and support the weight of a horse and wagon. He found 6 perfect specimens growing on the northern slope, their trunks nearly 2 feet in diameter. Felling the first tree took him the better part of a morning. His axe bit deep into the wood with each powerful swing, his muscles flexing and bunching beneath his worn flannel shirt. Sweat soaked through the fabric despite the cool mountain air. When the tree finally came down with a tremendous crack, Elijah felt a surge of satisfaction. This was honest work, the kind that required strength and skill in equal measure. Getting the logs to the creek was another matter entirely. He hitched his 2 draft horses, Thunder and Storm, to each log and guided them carefully down the mountainside. The horses strained against their harnesses, their hooves digging into the soft earth as they hauled the massive timbers. Elijah walked alongside them, speaking in low, encouraging tones. his hand ready on the lead rope in case they needed guidance or reassurance. Mary watched from the cabin porch as her husband worked. Her hand rested on her swelling belly, feeling their child move within her. She had told Elijah she did not need him to build a bridge, that they could manage as they had been managing. But she knew her words had fallen on deaf ears. When Elijah Stone decided to protect his family, nothing could dissuade him. That fierce protectiveness was one of the things she loved most about him. She walked down to the creek on the fourth day, carrying a basket with fresh bread, cheese, and coffee. Elijah had been working since dawn, and the sun was now high overhead. She found him waist-deep in the frigid water, setting stones for the bridge's foundation. His shirt was off despite the cold, revealing the powerful muscles of his back and shoulders as they flexed with each movement. His skin was bronzed from years in the sun, marked here and there with scars from encounters with wild animals and the general hazards of mountain life. "Elijah," she called over the sound of the rushing water, "come eat something." He looked up, his face breaking into a smile that transformed his rugged features. He waded out of the creek, water streaming from his buckskin pants, and climbed the bank to where she stood. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, but also the determination that drove him forward. "You should not be walking all the way down here," he said, concern creeping into his voice as he noticed her slightly labored breathing. "I am fine," she assured him, reaching up to brush a strand of wet hair from his face. "But you need to eat and rest. You have been pushing yourself too hard." He took the basket from her and sat down on a large rock, pulling her gently down beside him. She nestled against his side, feeling the warmth radiating from his body despite his dip in the icy creek. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the water rush past. "Tell me why this is so important to you," Mary said softly, though she already knew the answer. Elijah was quiet for a long moment, chewing his bread thoughtfully. When he finally spoke, his deep voice was rough with emotion. "I almost lost my mother when I was a boy. She was crossing a flooded creek, much like this one. She survived, but barely. I watched my father pull her from the water, watched her cough up muddy water for what seemed like hours. I swore then that if I ever had a family of my own, I would never let them face that kind of danger, if I could prevent it." Mary took his large, calloused hand in both of hers. "You never told me that." "It is not an easy memory to carry," he admitted. "But now with you carrying our child, that memory has teeth. Every time you cross this creek, I see my mother's face. I see you slipping, falling, being swept away. I cannot live with that fear, Mary. I will not." She kissed his knuckles, her eyes misty with tears. "Then build your bridge, my love. Build it strong and true, and know that every time I cross it, I will think of this moment and how much you love us." Elijah pulled her close, his arms encircling her carefully, mindfully of her condition. They sat there together, husband and wife, while the creek rushed past and the October sun warmed their faces. It was a moment of perfect peace in the midst of enormous effort, and both of them held onto it like a precious gift. The foundation work took another week. Elijah dug deep into the creek bed on both sides, creating stable platforms of stone and packed earth that would support the main beams. He worked in the water for hours each day, his hands growing raw and blistered despite their calluses. The cold was bone deep, making his joints ache, but he pushed through the discomfort with stubborn resolve. A traveling merchant named Samuel Cooper came through their area during the second week of construction. He stopped his wagon at the creek's edge and watched Elijah work for several minutes before calling out, "That is quite an undertaking you have there, friend." Elijah straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "It is necessary." Samuel climbed down from his wagon, a portly man with a friendly face and shrewd eyes. "Building a bridge is no small feat. Most men would just move closer to town." "We like it here," Elijah said simply, "and my wife needs safe passage to Redemption Springs." Understanding dawned on Samuel's face as he noticed Mary emerging from the cabin, her pregnancy evident even from a distance. "Ah, I see. Well, you are doing it right, I will give you that. Those foundation stones look solid, but you will need more than logs to make it truly safe. You will need proper planking for the deck, railings for her to hold on to." Elijah nodded slowly. He had been thinking the same thing, but had been uncertain about how to acquire the necessary materials. Lumber was expensive, and they had little money to spare. Samuel seemed to read his thoughts. "I have planking in my wagon, good pine boards, meant for a customer in Silverton who never paid for them. I could let you have them at a fair price, and I will tell you what I will trade them for 3 of your elk hides and whatever cash you can spare. I have seen your furs in the trading post. They are quality." It was a generous offer, more generous than Elijah had any right to expect from a stranger. He studied Samuel's face, looking for any sign of deceit, but found only honest goodwill. "Why would you do that?" Elijah asked. Samuel shrugged, glancing again at Mary. "My own wife died giving birth to our son 5 years ago. There was no doctor close enough to help her, no safe way to get her to town in time. If I can help prevent another man from experiencing that kind of loss, well, that seems like a good use of my lumber." Elijah felt something tighten in his chest. He extended his hand to Samuel, and the two men shook firmly. "You have a deal, and my thanks." They unloaded the planking together, stacking it near the bridge site. Samuel stayed for supper that evening, sharing stories of his travels while Mary served venison stew and biscuits. It was pleasant to have company, a reminder that even in this isolated wilderness, human kindness could still flourish. After Samuel departed the next morning, Elijah returned to his work with renewed energy. The main support beams went up next, massive logs that he and the horses hauled into position with ropes and sheer determination. He used a technique he had seen employed once by Army engineers, notching the logs and fitting them together so they locked into place. It was painstaking work that required precision, each cut measured carefully before his axe fell. Mary helped where she could, holding ropes steady or passing him tools. Elijah tried to discourage her involvement, worried about her overexerting herself, but she was stubborn in her own quiet way. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she reminded him more than once. "Besides, this is our bridge. I want to be part of building it." The main structure began to take shape by the end of the 3rd week. 2 massive log beams spanned the creek, supported by the stone foundations Elijah had built. Crossbeams connected them, creating a framework that was remarkably solid. Elijah tested the structure himself before allowing Mary anywhere near it, walking across the bare beams while the water rushed beneath him. The bridge held firm, not even a tremor or creak. Next came the decking. Elijah laid Samuel's planks across the crossbeams, securing each one with wooden pegs he carved himself. He worked methodically, ensuring each board was level and stable before moving to the next. The sound of his mallet driving pegs home echoed through the canyon, a steady rhythm that marked progress. A storm rolled in during the 4th week, bringing wind and cold rain that turned the worksite into a muddy mess. Elijah continued working despite the conditions, his clothing soaked through, his hair plastered to his head. Mary finally came down and physically dragged him back to the cabin. "Enough," she said firmly, her hands on her hips. "You will catch your death out there, and then where will we be?" He wanted to argue, to say that he needed to finish, but the warmth of the cabin and the concern in her eyes melted his resistance. She helped him out of his wet clothes and wrapped him in a thick blanket, then made him sit by the fire while she heated water for coffee. "You're going to make yourself sick," she said, her voice softening as she handed him a steaming cup. "The bridge will still be there when the storm passes." Elijah wrapped his hands around the cup, grateful for the warmth. "I just want it finished. I want you safe." "I am safe," she said, settling into the chair beside him. "I am safe because I have you. The bridge will be wonderful, but Elijah, you are enough. You have always been enough." Her words hit him harder than any physical blow. He set down his cup and pulled her into his lap, mindful of her belly, and buried his face in her hair. "I love you," he whispered, "more than I have words to say." "I know," she whispered back. "I've always known." They stayed like that while the storm raged outside, wrapped in each other's warmth and the knowledge that they had built something more lasting than any bridge. They had built a life together, a love that could weather any storm. The rain continued for 3 days, swelling the creek to twice its normal size. Elijah watched from the cabin window as the water rose to within inches of his bridge deck, but the structure held. The foundations did not shift, the beams did not bow. Pride swelled in his chest. When the storm finally broke, he was back at work before the ground had even dried. The railings were the final major component. Elijah built them sturdy and high, ensuring Mary would have something solid to grip as she crossed. He used smaller logs for the posts, setting them deep into the bridge deck, and wove thick rope between them for the rails. The result was not elegant, but it was functional and strong. Mary could hold onto those railings with both hands if she needed to, and they would not give way. It was early November when Elijah finally stepped back and declared the bridge complete. He had spent 5 weeks of backbreaking labor, and the result was impressive. The bridge stood solid and strong over Silver Creek, its weathered wood already starting to blend with the natural landscape. It was 22 feet long and 8 feet wide, with sturdy railings on both sides and a deck that did not flex or creak underfoot. Mary came down to inspect the finished product, walking slowly from the cabin with one hand supporting her lower back. Elijah met her at the near end of the bridge, extending his hand. "May I have the honor?" he asked, a rare smile playing at the corners of his mouth. She took his hand, and together they stepped onto the bridge. Their footsteps echoed on the solid planking as they walked slowly across. Below them, the creek rushed and tumbled, but they were high above it, safe and secure. When they reached the far side, Mary turned to look back at what her husband had built. "It is magnificent," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Elijah, you did this. You actually did this." "We are safe now," he said simply. "That is all that matters." But Mary shook her head, looking up at him with tears streaming down her face. "No. What matters is that you love us this much. What matters is that when you saw danger, you did not accept it or make excuses. You literally moved earth and stone and timber to protect your family. Do you understand what a gift that is?" Elijah cupped her face in his rough hands, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "You are my gift, Mary. You and this child. Everything I do is because you gave me a reason to do it. Before you, I was just existing. Now, I am living." They kissed there in the middle of the bridge, a long, deep kiss that spoke of love and gratitude and bone-deep connection. When they finally pulled apart, the sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. News of the bridge spread quickly. Within a week, neighbors from miles around came to see what Elijah Stone had built. Most of the homesteaders in the area were impressed, and several asked if he would help them with similar projects. Elijah politely declined. He had built this bridge for one purpose, and that purpose was standing beside him, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. The bridge transformed their daily lives. Mary could now walk to town whenever she needed to, secure in the knowledge that she would not fall into the rushing creek. She went twice a week to the general store, and once a week she met with other women from the area for sewing circles. The social interaction was good for her, and Elijah was glad to see her happy. Winter came early that year, arriving in mid-November with a heavy snowfall that blanketed the mountains. Elijah spent his days hunting and trapping, bringing in meat and furs that would sustain them through the cold months and provide income in the spring. Mary kept the cabin warm and bright, cooking hearty meals and reading aloud in the evenings from the small collection of books they owned. As her pregnancy advanced into the 8th month, Mary's movements became more labored. Elijah watched her with increasing concern, making sure she was never without water or warmth. He had moved their bed closer to the fire for the winter, and he made sure she had plenty of furs and blankets to stay comfortable. On a cold December morning, Mary woke with a backache that would not ease. She said nothing to Elijah at first, not wanting to worry him, but by midday, the pain had intensified. When a contraction gripped her, sharp and undeniable, she knew their child was coming early. "Elijah," she called, her voice strained. He was at her side in an instant, his face pale beneath his beard. "What is wrong?" "The baby," she gasped. "The baby is coming." For a moment, Elijah froze. It was too early. She was not due for another month. Then, his training kicked in, the instincts that had kept him alive in the wilderness for years. He helped Mary to the bed and made her as comfortable as possible. "I'm going to get Dr. Harrison," he said, already moving toward the door. "There is no time," Mary said, grabbing his wrist with surprising strength. "Elijah, please, do not leave me." He looked at her, saw the fear in her eyes, and made his decision. He would deliver this child himself if he had to. He had helped birth calves and foals before. How different could it be? Very different, as it turned out. As the hours passed and Mary's labor intensified, Elijah felt more helpless than he had ever felt in his life. This was not a problem he could solve with strength or skill. All he could do was hold Mary's hand, wipe her brow with cool cloths, and whisper encouragements that felt woefully inadequate. Night fell, and still the baby had not come. Mary was exhausted, her face pale and drawn. Elijah was terrified, but forced himself to remain calm for her sake. He remembered the stories his mother had told about childbirth, the advice she had given him once when he asked about such things. He put Mary in different positions, trying to help the baby descend. He gave her sips of water and spoke to her constantly, keeping her focused and alert. Just before midnight, everything changed. Mary's contractions came faster and harder, and she bore down with a primal strength that amazed him. Elijah positioned himself to catch the baby, his large hands ready but gentle. "You can do this," he told her, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "You are the strongest person I know, Mary. You can do this." With a final push and a cry that echoed through the cabin, their child entered the world. Elijah caught the tiny, slippery body in his hands, his eyes wide with wonder and terror. For a heart-stopping moment, the baby was silent and still. Then, as if sensing his father's fear, the infant drew breath and let out a healthy wail. "It is a boy," Elijah said, his voice breaking with emotion. "Mary, we have a son." He quickly cleaned the baby with warm water and wrapped him in soft cloth before placing him in Mary's arms. She looked down at their child, tears streaming down her face, and Elijah saw a joy there that made everything worthwhile. Every hour of labor on the bridge, every moment of fear during the delivery, all of it was worth this single perfect moment. "Hello, little one," Mary whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand. The infant's fingers immediately curled around hers, a reflexive grip that seemed to seal their bond. "We have been waiting for you." Elijah sat beside them on the bed, wrapping his arms around both his wife and his son. He had faced bears and mountain lions, blizzards and droughts, but nothing had prepared him for the overwhelming love he felt in this moment. This tiny person, barely an hour old, had already become the center of his universe. "What should we name him?" Mary asked, looking up at her husband. Elijah thought for a moment, studying his son's face. "Samuel," he said finally. "After the merchant who helped us, he said he lost his wife in childbirth. Maybe naming our boy after him will honor her memory somehow." Mary smiled. "Samuel Stone. It is a good, strong name. I think it suits him." They stayed awake most of that night, too filled with wonder to sleep. Elijah kept the fire burning high, ensuring his family was warm. He brought Mary food and water, making sure she had everything she needed to recover her strength. And he held his son, marveling at how something so small could have such a powerful grip on his heart. The next morning, as soon as it was light enough to travel, Elijah crossed his bridge and rode hard to Redemption Springs. He found Dr. Harrison at breakfast and practically dragged the man back to the cabin. The doctor examined both Mary and the baby, declaring them healthy despite the early arrival and lack of medical assistance. "You did well," Dr. Harrison told Elijah, packing up his instruments. "Not many men could have managed what you did. Your wife and son are lucky to have you." Elijah shook his head. "I am the lucky one." Over the following weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. Samuel was a good baby, healthy and strong despite his early arrival. He nursed well and slept in long stretches, giving Mary time to recover from the birth. Elijah took on all the household chores, in addition to his hunting and trapping, refusing to let Mary do anything strenuous. The bridge proved its worth again and again during those weeks. Dr. Harrison came twice more to check on Mary and the baby, crossing easily on the solid structure. Neighbors brought food and supplies, grateful they did not have to risk the icy creek to deliver them. One woman told Mary that she prayed daily thanking God for Elijah's bridge, as it made visiting so much safer. Christmas came, and Elijah cut down a small pine tree to bring into the cabin. Mary decorated it with strings of dried berries and paper ornaments she made herself. It was Samuel's first Christmas, and though he was too young to understand, his parents celebrated with quiet joy. Elijah had carved a small wooden horse for his son, sanding it smooth so there were no rough edges. It was the first of many toys he would make over the years. Winter deepened, bringing snow that piled high around the cabin. Elijah kept the pathways clear, including the bridge, which he shoveled every morning. The structure remained solid beneath the snow's weight, its foundations unshaken by the freeze and thaw cycles that could destroy lesser constructions. In late January, a severe storm trapped them inside for 3 days. The wind howled around the cabin, and snow fell so thick they could not see more than a few feet beyond the windows. Elijah kept the fire burning continuously, burning through their wood supply faster than he liked. But they were warm and safe, and that was what mattered. On the 3rd night of the storm, Mary woke to find Elijah standing at the window, looking out into the darkness. Samuel slept peacefully in his cradle nearby, unaware of his father's vigil. "What are you thinking about?" Mary asked softly, not wanting to startle him. Elijah turned, his face thoughtful in the firelight. "I'm thinking about how close we came to disaster. If the baby had come before I built the bridge, during a storm like this, I do not know what I would have done. I could not have made it to town for help. We would have been completely alone." Mary rose from the bed and joined him at the window, slipping her arm around his waist. "But you did build the bridge. You saw the danger and you eliminated it. That is who you are, Elijah. You do not wait for disasters to happen. You prevent them." "I wish I could prevent all of them," he said quietly. "I wish I could keep you and Samuel safe from everything." "You cannot protect us from everything," Mary said gently. "But you can love us, and you can do your best. That is all anyone can do, and your best is extraordinary." He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." "You already are," she whispered. The storm broke the next morning, revealing a world transformed by snow. Everything was white and pristine, the harsh angles of the landscape softened by the heavy blanket of powder. Elijah bundled up and went outside to assess the damage. The bridge was buried under 2 feet of snow, but when he cleared it off, the structure was completely intact. Not a single board had shifted or cracked. February brought a brief warming trend that turned the snow to slush and swelled the creek to dangerous levels. Elijah stood on his bridge and watched the water rage beneath him, easily 6 feet higher than normal. The bridge deck was a good 8 feet above the usual water level, and even now, at the height of the flood, the water did not touch the boards. His careful planning had paid off. Other families in the area were not so fortunate. The Hendersons lost their footbridge in the flood, and Old Man Patterson nearly drowned trying to cross the creek on horseback. When Elijah heard about these incidents in town, he felt a deep gratitude for the instinct that had driven him to build something so sturdy. As winter turned to spring, Samuel grew rapidly. By 3 months old, he was smiling and cooing, responding to his parents' voices with obvious delight. Elijah discovered that making his son laugh was one of life's greatest pleasures. He would make funny faces or gentle tickling motions, rewarded by peals of infant laughter that filled the cabin with joy. Mary watched her husband with their son and fell in love with him all over again. This massive, powerful man who could fell trees and build bridges became gentle and soft when holding his child. He sang lullabies in his deep, rumbling voice and paced the floor at night when Samuel was fussy, never complaining about the lost sleep. Spring also brought new challenges. The snowmelt made the trails muddy and treacherous, and Elijah had to spend considerable time reinforcing the approaches to the bridge. He built up the banks with more stone and gravel, creating solid ramps that would not wash away in heavy rain. It was tedious work, but he did it without complaint, knowing that every improvement made his family safer. In April, Samuel Cooper returned, his wagon loaded with goods for the spring trading season. He was delighted to meet the baby who shared his name and spent an evening at the cabin, regaling them with stories of his winter travels. "Your bridge has become famous," Samuel told them over supper. "People in 3 counties are talking about it. Some are calling it Stone's Crossing now." Elijah shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "I just built what needed building." "Maybe so," Samuel said, "but you built it right. There are men with training and experience who could not have done better. You should be proud." After Samuel left the next morning, Mary teased her husband about his fame. "Stone's Crossing," she said with a grin. "You are a landmark now." "I am a husband and father," he corrected. "That is the only title I care about." But privately, Elijah did feel a sense of pride in what he had accomplished. The bridge stood as a testament to his love for his family, a physical manifestation of his determination to protect them. Every time Mary crossed it with Samuel in her arms, Elijah felt that pride anew. Summer arrived with warm sunshine and blooming wildflowers. Mary was fully recovered from childbirth and had regained her strength. She planted a garden near the cabin, growing vegetables that would supplement their diet and provide variety to their meals. Samuel continued to thrive, growing chubby and happy on his mother's milk. Elijah taught Mary to fish that summer, taking her down to the creek below the bridge where the water pooled in calm eddies. They would sit on the bank together while Samuel napped nearby in a basket, their fishing lines trailing in the water, and talk about their dreams for the future. "I want more children," Mary said one afternoon, watching Samuel sleep. "I want our cabin to be full of noise and laughter." Elijah smiled, reaching over to take her hand. "How many more?" "3 or 4 at least," she said. "I was an only child, and it was lonely. I want our children to have siblings to play with and rely on." "Then we will have 3 or 4 more," Elijah agreed, "though I might need to build a bigger cabin." "And a bigger bridge," Mary teased. "The bridge is plenty big enough for a dozen children," he assured her. "I built it to last generations." And he had. As the months turned to years, the bridge weathered every storm and flood without faltering. It became a gathering place for the community, a landmark that people used for directions and meetups. The Stones were always gracious about sharing their bridge, never charging a toll or turning anyone away. Samuel took his first steps on that bridge when he was 10 months old, toddling between his parents with determination while the water rushed beneath him. Mary cried with joy, and Elijah swept his son up in his powerful arms, tossing him gently in the air until the boy shrieked with laughter. When Samuel was 18 months old, Mary discovered she was pregnant again. Elijah's reaction was pure joy. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. This time, they knew what to expect. There was no fear, only excitement. "The bridge will see another baby across," Mary said, her hand on her still flat belly. "It is already part of our family's story." "It is the foundation of our story," Elijah corrected. "It is where everything changed." The second pregnancy was easier than the first. Mary was healthy and strong, and Dr. Harrison assured them everything was progressing normally. Elijah was less anxious this time, though no less protective. He still worried, but it was the normal worry of an expectant father rather than the stark terror he had felt the first time. Their daughter was born in August of 1874, on a warm night filled with the sound of crickets and the smell of summer flowers. Dr. Harrison was present this time, having been summoned when Mary's labor began. The delivery was quick and uncomplicated, and soon Elijah was holding another child, this one a tiny girl with a cap of dark hair. "She looks like you," Mary said, exhausted but happy. "She is beautiful like you," Elijah countered, unable to take his eyes off his daughter. They named her Eleanor, after Mary's mother. Little Samuel, now nearly 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He would sit beside her cradle for hours, watching her sleep and gently patting her tiny hand. Life with 2 children was busier, but no less joyful. The cabin that had once felt spacious now seemed smaller, filled with the sounds of children playing and crying and laughing. Elijah was true to his word and began planning an expansion, determined to give his growing family more room. But first, he made improvements to the bridge. He added a wider deck, expanding it to 10 feet across so a wagon could pass more easily. He reinforced the railings and added a roof over part of the structure, creating shelter from rain and snow. The bridge evolved from a simple crossing to a substantial piece of infrastructure that served the entire community. In the fall of 1875, a representative from the territorial government came to see the bridge. He spent an hour examining the structure, making notes and sketches. When he finished, he sought out Elijah, who was working in his field. "Mr. Stone, I am impressed with what you have built here," the man said. "The territory would like to offer you a position as a bridge engineer. We need men with your skills to help develop the region's infrastructure." Elijah listened politely but shook his head. "I am honored, but I am not interested. My place is here with my family." "We would pay well," the representative pressed. "You could afford a house in town, formal schooling for your children." "My children will be educated," Elijah said firmly. "My wife was a teacher, and our home is here. This is where we belong." The representative left disappointed, but Elijah felt no regret. He had built the bridge for a specific purpose, to keep his family safe. He had no desire to build bridges for strangers, no matter how well it paid. His calling was here, in these mountains, with these people he loved more than life itself. Winter came again, the fourth winter since Elijah had built the bridge. It was a harsh one, with temperatures dropping below zero and staying there for weeks. But the cabin was warm, and they had plenty of food stored away. Elijah had killed an elk in late fall, and the meat was frozen and preserved, enough to last them until spring. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell softly outside, the family gathered around their little pine tree. Samuel, now 3 years old, helped his father hang the berry strings while Eleanor, 4 months old, watched from her mother's lap. It was a simple celebration, but it was perfect. "Tell us the story of the bridge, Papa," Samuel asked, as he often did. Elijah settled into his chair and pulled his son onto his lap. "Well, once upon a time, there was a mountain man who loved his wife very much." "That's you and Mama," Samuel interjected. "That is right," Elijah continued, "and the mountain man saw that the creek was dangerous, especially for his wife who was carrying their baby. So he decided to build a bridge." "A big bridge," Samuel added. "The biggest bridge he could build," Elijah agreed. "He worked for weeks, cutting trees and moving stones. His hands got blistered and his back got sore, but he kept working because he loved his family." "And then what happened?" Samuel asked, though he knew the story by heart. "Then he finished the bridge just in time for their baby to be born. And that baby was you." Samuel beamed with pride, as he always did at this part of the story. "And now Eleanor came across the bridge too." "She did," Mary said, kissing her daughter's head. "The bridge brought our whole family together safely." Later, after the children were asleep, Elijah and Mary stood on the porch, watching the snow fall. The bridge was visible in the moonlight, a solid shadow spanning the white expanse of the frozen creek. "Do you ever regret it?" Mary asked, "staying here instead of taking that government job?" "Never," Elijah said without hesitation. "This is where I belong. You and the children are my life's work. No bridge I could build for someone else would mean what this one means." Mary leaned into his warmth, her head resting against his chest. "You are a good man, Elijah Stone, the best man I have ever known." He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "You made me a good man, Mary. Before you, I was just surviving. You taught me how to live." They stood there in the quiet snowfall, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that was stronger than any structure of wood and stone. The bridge stood as a symbol of that life, a testament to love and determination and the lengths one man would go to protect his family. The years rolled on, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Samuel grew tall and strong like his father, with the same gray eyes and quiet determination. Eleanor developed her mother's grace and intelligence, but with a streak of wildness that came from growing up in the mountains. In 1877, Mary gave birth to twins, two boys they named Jacob and Joshua, and the cabin that Elijah had expanded was filled to bursting with noise and life. The bridge remained the heart of their homestead. It was where the children played when the weather was nice, where neighbors stopped to chat when passing by, where Elijah and Mary stole quiet moments together when they could. Elijah maintained it meticulously, replacing any board that showed signs of wear, keeping the foundation strong and the railings secure. In the spring of 1879, when Samuel was 7 years old, he asked his father to teach him carpentry. Elijah was delighted. He made his son a small toolbox and began showing him the basics, starting with simple projects like birdhouses and small stools. But Samuel's interest always returned to the bridge. "Why did you make it so strong, Papa?" Samuel asked one day as they inspected the structure together. Elijah knelt down to his son's level. "Because I built it to protect the people I love." When you build something for someone you love, you do not take shortcuts. You do not settle for good enough. You make it the best you possibly can, because they deserve nothing less. Samuel nodded seriously, absorbing this wisdom. "When I grow up, I am going to build things for the people I love too." "I know you will," Elijah said, ruffling his son's hair, "and they will be lucky to have you." Eleanor, at age 5, showed no interest in carpentry, but had inherited her mother's love of books. Mary taught her to read early, and the little girl could often be found sitting on the bridge with a book in her lap, reading aloud to the water rushing beneath her. It became such a common sight that Mary started calling it Eleanor's reading spot. The twins were wild little boys, always getting into trouble and keeping their parents on their toes. They climbed everything, explored everywhere, and seemed to fear nothing. Elijah had to rescue them from more precarious situations than he could count, but he did so with patience and good humor. They reminded him of himself at that age, full of energy and curiosity about the world. In the summer of 1880, tragedy struck the community. A fire swept through Redemption Springs, destroying several buildings, including the schoolhouse where Mary had once taught. The town rallied to rebuild, and Elijah offered his skills to help. He spent 2 weeks in town, working alongside other men to construct a new schoolhouse. It was hard work, but satisfying, and it reminded him of why he had built the bridge in the first place. Building was an act of hope, a declaration that the future was worth investing in. When he returned home, Mary met him at the bridge. The children clustered around her. She ran to him, and he caught her up in his arms, spinning her around just as he had done so many years ago when they were newly married. The children cheered and laughed, and Elijah felt his heart swell with gratitude for this life he had been given. "I missed you," Mary said, her eyes shining with tears. 2 weeks felt like forever. "I'm home now," he assured her, "and I'm not leaving again." That night, after the children were asleep, Mary told Elijah she was pregnant again. It would be their 5th child, and though the pregnancy was unexpected, they were both thrilled. Their family would grow even larger, and they would need to expand the cabin yet again. Elijah was already making plans, imagining where he could add another room, how he could make the space work for their growing brood. Their 5th child, a girl they named Rose, was born in March of 1881. She came into the world during a spring snowstorm, with Dr. Harrison present and the older children waiting anxiously in the next room. Elijah held Mary's hand through the labor, just as he had with all their children, offering strength and encouragement. When Rose let out her first cry, Samuel and Eleanor cheered from the other room. The twins, now 4 years old, jumped up and down with excitement. Elijah went to let them in to meet their new sister, and the cabin was filled with the joyful chaos of a large family welcoming its newest member. Life with 5 children was demanding, but Elijah and Mary had learned to work as a team. They had routines and systems in place, and the older children helped with the younger ones. Samuel, now 9 years old, was particularly helpful with the twins, keeping them occupied while Mary tended to the baby. Eleanor, at 7, loved helping her mother with cooking and sewing. The bridge continued to serve them well. As the children grew older, they used it constantly, crossing back and forth to fish in the creek, to explore the woods on the far side, to visit friends whose homesteads were accessible via the far bank. It had become such an integral part of their lives that they barely thought about it anymore, which was exactly as Elijah had intended. The best infrastructure was invisible, simply there when you needed it. In 1883, when Samuel was 11 years old, a terrible storm swept through the region. It was worse than any storm Elijah had seen in his years in the mountains. Rain fell in sheets for 3 days straight, and the creek swelled to unprecedented levels. Elijah watched anxiously from the cabin as the water rose higher and higher, eventually reaching the bottom of the bridge deck. "Will it hold?" Mary asked, her voice tight with worry. "It will hold," Elijah said, but privately he was not entirely certain. He had built the bridge to withstand floods, but this was beyond anything he had anticipated. The water continued to rise throughout the 3rd day. By evening, it was actually flowing over the bridge deck, several inches of water rushing across the boards. Elijah stood on the bank, ready to grab the children if they needed to flee, but unwilling to abandon their home unless absolutely necessary. Then, just as suddenly as it had risen, the water began to recede. The rain stopped, and within a few hours the creek had dropped back to its normal bounds. Elijah immediately went to inspect the bridge, his heart in his throat. The structure had held. Not a single beam had shifted, not a single board had torn free. The foundation stones remained exactly where he had placed them more than a decade earlier. Water damage was minimal, mostly cosmetic. Elijah ran his hands over the wood, feeling the strength that remained, and felt tears prick his eyes. He had built well. His family was safe. Mary came to stand beside him, the baby on her hip. "You built it to last," she said softly. "I built it for you," he replied. "All of this, everything I have done, has been for you and the children." She kissed him then, a sweet, lingering kiss that reminded him of all the reasons he loved her. When they parted, the children were running toward them, eager to inspect the bridge themselves. Elijah lifted each one up in turn, showing them that the structure was sound, explaining how good foundations and proper construction could withstand even the worst nature had to offer. That night, the family held a celebration of sorts. They had survived the storm, and the bridge had proven itself once again. Elijah sat at the head of the table, surrounded by his wife and children, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was what he had worked for. This was what the bridge represented, not just safe passage across a creek, but a life built on love and dedication. Samuel, who was becoming more and more interested in his father's work, asked thoughtful questions about how the bridge had been designed. Elijah answered each one patiently, pleased by his son's curiosity. Perhaps Samuel would become a builder like his father. Perhaps he would carry on the tradition of creating things that lasted, things that protected and served. Eleanor was more interested in the story of the bridge than its mechanics. "Tell us again about why you built it," she asked, "about how you wanted to keep Mama safe." So Elijah told the story again, as he had done countless times over the years. But each telling was fresh, because each time he remembered how terrified he had been at the thought of losing Mary, how determined he had been to protect her. The fear had faded with time, but the love that had driven him remained as strong as ever. The twins, Jacob and Joshua, just wanted to know if they could play on the bridge the next day. Elijah laughed and assured them they could, once he had inspected it more thoroughly in daylight. Little Rose, only 2 years old, just banged her spoon on the table and smiled at everyone, blissfully unaware of the drama that had unfolded. As the years continued to pass, the Stone family became pillars of their community. Elijah was known as a man of integrity and skill, someone who could be counted on in a crisis. Mary opened a small school in their expanded cabin, teaching not just their own children, but several others from nearby homesteads. The bridge made it possible for children from the far side of the creek to attend safely, further cementing its importance to the community. In 1885, when Samuel was 13, he helped his father build a barn. It was Samuel's idea to use some of the same techniques that had made the bridge so sturdy, and together they created a structure that was solid and functional. Elijah watched his son work and felt a fierce pride. Samuel was becoming a man, and a good one. Eleanor, at 11, had started helping her mother teach the younger students. She had a patience and gentleness that made her a natural educator. Mary often told Elijah that Eleanor would probably become a teacher herself someday, continuing the family tradition. The twins, now 8 years old, were still wild but had learned to channel their energy into useful work. They helped with the animals in the garden, and they were becoming skilled hunters under their father's tutelage. Rose, at 4, was a sweet, cheerful child who brought joy to everyone around her. That fall, Mary told Elijah she was pregnant again. They would have their 6th child the following spring. Elijah's first reaction was worry. Mary was 37 now, not a young woman anymore, and childbirth carried risks. But Mary was healthy and strong, and Dr. Harrison assured them there was no reason to expect complications. Their 6th child, another boy they named Daniel, was born in April of 1886. The birth was long but uncomplicated, and soon Elijah was holding another son, marveling once again at the miracle of new life. The older children were enchanted with their new brother, and the cabin felt more like a small school than a home, filled with children of various ages all bustling about. Daniel was a quiet baby, content to watch the world with serious eyes. He grew slowly but steadily, and by his first birthday, he was walking and starting to talk. Elijah built him a small wooden wagon that the baby loved, pulling it around the cabin and making engine noises with his mouth. In 1887, tragedy struck when a neighboring homesteader, a man named Thomas Baker, was killed in a logging accident. His widow, Sarah, was left with 3 young children and no means of support. The community rallied around her, But it was Elijah who made the biggest difference. He spent weeks helping Sarah harvest what she could from her land, repairing her cabin, and ensuring she had enough supplies to last the winter. Mary invited Sarah and her children to stay with them for a while, and despite the crowded conditions, it was the right thing to do. Sarah was grateful beyond words, and she helped Mary with the teaching and the housework, earning her keep while she figured out what to do next. Eventually, Sarah's brother came from Denver to take her and the children back east where they had family. Before she left, she thanked Elijah and Mary with tears streaming down her face. "You saved our lives," she said simply. "I will never forget what you did for us." After she left, Mary hugged her husband tight. "You're a good man, Elijah Stone, not just to us, but to everyone." "I just did what anyone would do," Elijah protested. "No," Mary said firmly. "You did what a good man would do. There is a difference." As the 1880s drew to a close, the Stone family continued to thrive. Samuel, now 17, was nearly as tall as his father and almost as strong. He had his father's skill with wood and stone, and he had started taking on small jobs for neighbors, building sheds and fixing fences. Elijah watched his eldest son with pride, knowing that Samuel would do well in whatever path he chose. Eleanor, at 15, had become a beautiful young woman with her mother's grace and her father's determination. She was the primary teacher for the younger students now, as Mary focused more on running the household and caring for the youngest children. Several young men from the area had started paying attention to Eleanor, but Elijah watched them like a hawk. His daughter would not marry just anyone. She deserved someone as good as she was. The twins, Jacob and Joshua, were 12 now and inseparable. They did everything together, finishing each other's sentences and communicating in a way that sometimes seemed almost telepathic. They were skilled hunters and trackers, having learned from their father, and they brought home game regularly to supplement the family's diet. Rose, at 8, was developing a love of music. Elijah had bought her a small wooden flute from a traveling merchant, and she practiced constantly, filling the cabin with melodies. She had a natural talent, and Mary encouraged her to develop it. Daniel, the baby at 3 years old, was quiet and thoughtful. He loved building things with wooden blocks and could spend hours creating elaborate structures. Elijah suspected Daniel might follow in his footsteps as a builder. In 1890, Mary told Elijah she was pregnant for the 7th time. Elijah was both thrilled and terrified. Mary was 42 now, and the risks were higher than ever. But Mary was confident, and her confidence helped steady his fears. Their 7th child, a girl they named Grace, was born in January of 1891. It was a difficult birth, the hardest one yet, and for several terrifying hours, Elijah feared he would lose Mary. But she fought through it with the same strength that had carried her through everything else, and when Grace finally arrived, both mother and baby were healthy. "This is the last one," Mary said weakly from the bed, cradling Grace. "I'm getting too old for this." Elijah, who had been pacing the floor in terror for hours, could only nod in agreement. 7 is a good number," he said, "a blessed number." Grace was a tiny, delicate baby who seemed almost fragile compared to her robust siblings. She was healthy and strong in her own way, and she quickly became the darling of the family. The older children doted on her, and she grew up surrounded by love and attention. As the 1890s progressed, the Stone family entered a new phase. Samuel, at 19, announced he was courting a young woman named Catherine Miller from Redemption Springs. Elijah and Mary met her and approved heartily. Catherine was sweet and hardworking, and it was clear she and Samuel were deeply in love. They were married in the summer of 1891 in a simple ceremony held on the bridge that had defined Samuel's life. Elijah stood with his son, placing Samuel's hand in Catherine's, and felt a bittersweet mixture of joy and loss. His boy was grown now, starting his own family. But Samuel and Catherine built a cabin just a mile away, staying close to the Stone homestead, and Elijah was grateful for that. Eleanor, at 17, was being courted by a young man named James Peterson, the son of the general store owner in Redemption Springs. Elijah watched the courtship carefully, but could find no fault with James. He was respectful, hard-working, and clearly adored Eleanor. When James asked for Eleanor's hand in marriage, Elijah gave his blessing, though not without some paternal trepidation. Eleanor and James were married in 1892, also on the bridge. It was becoming a family tradition, this marrying on the bridge that Elijah had built to keep his pregnant wife safe so many years ago. Each wedding felt like a validation of everything he had worked for, a celebration of the life he and Mary had created together. The twins turned 16 in 1893 and showed no signs of settling down anytime soon. They were still wild, still inseparable, and still devoted to the mountains and wilderness that had raised them. Elijah suspected they would eventually trap and hunt for a living, following in his own footsteps from his younger days. Rose, at 12, continued to develop her musical talents. She had learned to play the piano at the church in town and was becoming quite accomplished. Mary talked about sending her to Denver for formal training, but Rose insisted she wanted to stay close to home. Daniel, at 7, was proving to be a gifted builder. He helped his father with projects constantly, showing an intuitive understanding of structure and design that amazed Elijah. "This one is going to build things that put my bridge to shame," Elijah told Mary proudly. Grace, at 2, was a bright, curious child who was just starting to talk in full sentences. She asked constant questions about everything, keeping Mary entertained and exhausted in equal measure. In 1894, Samuel and Catherine welcomed Elijah and Mary's first grandchild, a boy they named Elijah Jr. Elijah held his tiny grandson and felt emotions he could barely name. This was legacy, he realized. This was what it all meant. His love for Mary had created this child, had created Samuel, and now Samuel's love for Catherine had created this new life. It was a chain of love and family stretching into the future, and the bridge was the first link in that chain. Later that year, Eleanor gave birth to twins, 2 girls named Alice and Anne. Elijah laughed when he heard. "Twins run in the family, it seems," he said. The family was growing exponentially now, spreading out but staying connected, always coming back to the original homestead and the bridge that had started everything. As the century drew to a close, Elijah found himself reflecting more and more on his life. He was 56 years old now, still strong, but feeling the aches and pains that came with age. Mary was 52, her blonde hair now streaked with silver, laugh lines crinkling the corners of her eyes. They had been married for over 20 years, had raised 7 children together, and were now watching their grandchildren grow. One evening in the fall of 1895, Elijah and Mary walked down to the bridge together, something they had not done alone in years. The children were all occupied elsewhere, the older ones with their own families, the younger ones asleep in the cabin. It was just the 2 of them and the sound of the creek flowing beneath them. They stood in the middle of the bridge, the same spot where they had stood when it was first completed all those years ago. The structure was weathered now, the wood gray and worn, but it was still solid. Elijah had maintained it faithfully, replacing boards as needed, keeping the foundation strong. "Do you remember that first day?" Mary asked, leaning against the railing. "When we walked across together for the first time?" "I remember everything," Elijah said. "I remember being terrified that it would not hold. I remember seeing you safe on the other side and feeling like I had accomplished something important." "You did accomplish something important," Mary said. "You built more than a bridge, Elijah. You built a legacy. Our children and grandchildren will cross this bridge for generations. Every time they do, they will be reminded of what love looks like." Elijah wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "I would build 1,000 bridges for you," he said softly. "I would move mountains. You gave me a life worth living, Mary. You made me more than just a man surviving in the wilderness. You made me a husband, a father, a part of something bigger than myself." Mary turned in his arms, her hands coming up to cup his bearded face. "And you gave me adventure and safety all at once. You gave me a love I never knew existed. Every single day I thank God that you were in Redemption Springs the day my trunk fell open." They kissed there in the twilight, 2 people who had built a life together through hard work, dedication, and unwavering love. The bridge stood solid beneath them, a testament to everything they had created. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. The twins, Jacob and Joshua, eventually did become trappers, ranging far into the mountains but always returning home regularly. They never married, content to live as they always had, together and independent. Rose pursued her music, eventually teaching piano lessons in town and performing at church services and community events. She married a gentleman named William Hughes in 1899, and they built a house in Redemption Springs but visited the homestead frequently. Daniel grew into a skilled craftsman, surpassing even his father in some ways. He designed and built homes throughout the region, always incorporating the lessons his father had taught him about building strong foundations and creating structures that would last. He married a woman named Rebecca in 1901, and together they had 4 children. Grace, the youngest, proved to be a talented artist. She drew and painted everything around her, capturing the beauty of the mountains and the life of the family. She eventually went to art school in Denver, but she always came home, unable to stay away from the place that had shaped her. Samuel and Catherine had 5 more children after Elijah Jr., filling their cabin with noise and laughter. Eleanor and James had 4 children total, including the twin girls. The Stone family tree was spreading wide and deep, rooted firmly in the Colorado mountains and the homestead that Elijah and Mary had carved out of the wilderness. In 1902, the territorial government again approached Elijah about his bridge. This time, they wanted to recognize it as a historical landmark and incorporate it into the new county road system that was being developed. Elijah, now 64 years old, was more amenable to the idea than he had been in his youth. "As long as my family can still use it freely," he stipulated, "I built it for them. I will not have them charged a toll to cross it." The agreement was made. Stone's Crossing, as it was now officially known, became part of the public infrastructure, but the Stone family retained unrestricted access. The county took over maintenance responsibilities, though Elijah still kept a close eye on their work, offering advice and occasionally correcting mistakes. Mary's health began to decline in 1903. She was 55 years old and had lived a hard life, though a happy one. The years of childbearing and homesteading had taken their toll. Elijah watched helplessly as the woman he loved more than life itself grew weaker and more fragile. The children rallied around their parents, taking turns staying at the homestead to help care for Mary and to give Elijah some relief. But Elijah rarely left her side. After all these years, after everything they had been through together, the thought of being apart from her was unbearable. On a warm June evening in 1904, Mary asked Elijah to take her to the bridge one last time. He carried her there gently, cradling her in his still strong arms as if she weighed nothing. The children and grandchildren followed, creating a procession across the structure that Elijah had built 32 years earlier to keep his pregnant wife safe. They gathered on the bridge, 3 generations of stones, all of them born from the love of 2 people who had found each other in the wilderness. Mary looked at each of her children and grandchildren, her eyes bright with tears and love. "I want you all to remember something," she said, her voice weak but clear. "This bridge is more than wood and stone. It is a symbol of what love can build. Your father built this to protect me, but in doing so, he created something that has served this entire community for decades. That is what love does. It does not just protect the ones we cherish. It creates something bigger, something that serves everyone." She turned to Elijah, reaching up to touch his face. "Thank you," she whispered, "for this bridge, for our children, for every single day of our life together. Thank you for loving me enough to move mountains." Elijah could barely speak through his tears. "Loving you was the easiest thing I ever did," he managed. "Everything else was just trying to be worthy of that love." Mary passed away peacefully 2 days later, surrounded by her family. Elijah held her hand as she drew her last breath, and when she was gone, something fundamental broke inside him. She had been his partner, his purpose, his everything for 27 years of marriage and 32 years since they had first met. The funeral was held on the bridge, as Mary had requested. It seemed fitting that she should be laid to rest from the structure that had defined so much of their life together. The entire community turned out, paying respects to a woman who had taught their children, helped their families, and embodied grace and strength in equal measure. After Mary's death, Elijah withdrew into himself for a time. His children worried about him, but Samuel understood. "He built that bridge for her," Samuel explained to his siblings. "Everything he did was for her. He needs time to figure out who he is without her." But Elijah was not without Mary, not really. She was everywhere he looked. She was in the cabin they had shared, in the faces of their children, in the bridge that stood as a testament to his love for her. And gradually, over the months that followed, Elijah came to understand that Mary had not left him. She had become part of everything he had built, woven into the very fabric of his life. He started spending time with his grandchildren, teaching them the skills he had taught their parents. He showed Elijah Jr., now 13 years old, how to properly fell a tree and square a log. He taught Alice and Anne how to fish in the creek below the bridge. He told stories to the younger grandchildren about their grandmother, keeping her memory alive through words and love. On the 1-year anniversary of Mary's death, Elijah made a decision. He gathered all his children and grandchildren at the homestead and led them to the bridge. There, he unveiled a carved wooden plaque he had made, mounting it on the bridge's railing. The plaque read, "Stone's Crossing. Built in 1872 by Elijah Stone for his wife Mary to keep her safe. May all who cross this bridge remember that love builds things that last." "This bridge was built for your mother," Elijah told his children, his voice strong despite his grief. "But it has become something more. It has served this community for over 30 years. It has seen weddings and celebrations. It has kept countless people safe. That is what your mother would have wanted. She always believed that love should serve more than just ourselves." Samuel stepped forward, placing his hand on his father's shoulder. "You built well, Pa. The bridge stands as strong today as the day you finished it, and it will stand for generations to come." Elijah nodded, looking out at his children and grandchildren gathered on the bridge. "Your mother and I built more than this bridge," he said. "We built a family, a legacy. You are all part of that. You carry her forward in everything you do." The years that followed were quieter, but no less meaningful. Elijah remained at the homestead, cared for by his children who took turns staying with him. He continued to maintain the bridge, though the county had officially taken over that responsibility. It was his way of staying connected to Mary, of honoring the promise he had made to her all those years ago. Daniel, who had become a renowned builder in his own right, worked with his father to write down everything Elijah knew about construction and design. They created a manual of sorts, documenting techniques and principles that Daniel could pass on to his own children and students. It became a treasured family heirloom, Elijah's knowledge preserved in ink and paper. In 1910, when Elijah was 72 years old, the county decided to replace the bridge. The structure was nearly 40 years old, and while it was still solid, modern engineering standards called for something more substantial. They planned to tear down Stone's Crossing and build a steel bridge in its place. The community revolted. Letters poured into the county office, petitions circulated, and a delegation led by Samuel Stone presented a case for preserving the bridge. It was not just a structure, they argued. It was a piece of history, a monument to the pioneering spirit that had built the region. The county relented, agreeing to build the new steel bridge 50 yards downstream while preserving Stone's Crossing as a historical site. Elijah attended the dedication ceremony for both bridges, standing tall and proud as officials, praised his craftsmanship and vision. "I just built what needed building," he said when asked to speak. "I built it for love, and I built it to last. That is all any of us can do. Build for love and build to last." Those words became something of a motto for the Stone family, repeated at weddings and passed down through generations. Build for love and build to last. Elijah lived to be 78 years old, finally passing away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1916. His funeral was held on the bridge, just as Mary's had been. All 7 of his children were there, along with 23 grandchildren and 14 great-grandchildren. The bridge, his bridge, held them all without even a creak. Samuel, now 63 years old himself, spoke at his father's funeral. "My father once told me that when you build something for someone you love, you do not take shortcuts. You make it the best you possibly can because they deserve nothing less." He lived that principle every day of his life. He built this bridge for our mother, and in doing so, he built something that served an entire community for nearly half a century. But more than that, he built a family founded on love, dedication, and the belief that we can make the world safer and better for the people we cherish. As Samuel spoke, snow began to fall softly, covering the bridge in a blanket of white. The family stood together in the cold, remembering a man who had been as solid and enduring as the structure he had built. Elijah Stone had lived a simple life by some standards, never becoming wealthy or famous beyond his small region. But he had built something that mattered. He had protected his family, served his community, and created a legacy that would endure long after he was gone. The bridge stood for another 80 years before it finally needed to be replaced. By then, 5 generations of Stones had crossed it, each one learning the story of how their ancestor had built it to keep his pregnant wife safe. The original timbers were preserved, some of them incorporated into a memorial park that was created on the site. A statue of Elijah Stone was erected there, showing him as he had been in his prime, a massive, powerful man with determination in his eyes and love in his heart. But the real monument was not the statue or even the preserved timbers. The real monument was the family he had created, the lives he had touched, and the example he had set. Love builds things that last, he had proven, not just bridges of wood and stone, but bridges of family and community that span generations. In the end, Elijah Stone had done exactly what he set out to do. He had kept his pregnant wife safe. He had built a bridge that served them through the birth of their first child and 6 more after that. He had created safe passage across a dangerous creek, and in doing so, he had built safe passage into a future filled with love, family, and purpose. The rushing waters of Silver Creek still flow, just as they did in 1872 when Elijah first decided to build his bridge. The creek still swells with snowmelt in spring and freezes in the hardest winters. But the descendants of Elijah and Mary Stone still live in those mountains, still tell the story of the bridge, and still remember the lesson he taught them all. Build for love and build to last. That was Elijah Stone's legacy, and it endures to this day, as strong and solid as the bridge he built to keep his family safe.